Next, let's call up Taryn Finnessey. Tell us a little about the Colorado Climate Plan from the Colorado Water Conservation Board. Please welcome Taryn Finnessey.
Thank you. You know, I do a lot of talks around the state, and I do a lot of talks with Nolan, and it never gets easier to follow him. So when Doug first asked me to talk, he said, "Hey, Taryn, will you talk about the politics of climate change on the global, national, and state level? And will you do it in 20 minutes?" And that was my reaction. I laughed out loud. And so I'm not going to talk about that today. Instead, I'm going to talk about the connections between recent global, national, and state efforts on climate change. And I hope you'll get more out of that than I would ever provide in 20-minute discussion on the politics. So as Nolan said, globally, whether you look at NOAA, NASA, the Japanese Meteorological Office, or the UK offices, 2015 was the warmest year on record globally. 10 of the warmest years on record have all occurred since 1998. Nationally, it was the second warmest year on record, and 7 of the 10 warmest years on record have occurred since 1998 if you just look at the lower 48. In Colorado, so this is the same information Nolan showed you, just in a I'd like to say prettier format. In Colorado, it was the 3rd warmest year on record. And what we know in Colorado is that we have warmed 2.5 degrees over the last 50 years, and we are likely to warm an additional 2.5 to 5 degrees by the middle of the century. So, what does that mean? We know this is a global issue, and last month, 195 nations, just here's my little question for you. How many people know how many nations exist in the world? Anyone? Anyone? I had to look it up. Just throw a number out, come on, work with me here. 190, I heard 300. So there are 196 if you count Taiwan. The US does not formally recognize Taiwan as an independent state. So if you subtract that out, there are 195 nations in the world, and that includes recent new arrivals like South Sudan. So 195 nations showed up in Paris last month. That's all of them, for those of you who aren't good at math. And they came to a landmark agreement that for the first time will commit nearly every country to lowering greenhouse gas emissions and help stave off some of the most drastic effects of climate change. They committed to reaching a target of 2 degrees C, and again, for those of you who are not good at math, I'll help you with a conversion. That's about 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit, or 3.7 degrees Fahrenheit, and actually set a lower target of 1.5 degrees of where they really want to be, and that's about 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit. So countries now have to move forward on ratification for this agreement to go into effect. And what the US brought to the table was an action plan, along with 185 other nations. By the end of this conference last month, 186 nations had published their action plans on how they were going to achieve this. So what the US does is sets an economy-wide target of reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 26 to 28% below 2005 levels. And with a kind of reach goal, because we've been talking about reach goals this week, of 28% by 2025. And to do that, they have done a number of things and set in place a number of actions that I want to talk to you about. One of which, or a big component of this, is the President's Climate Action Plan. This came out about 2 years ago. And when it is fully implemented, the policies put forth under this under this plan will decrease carbon pollution, will increase the use of renewables, increase energy efficiency, decrease end-user costs, and of course, improve public health. One of the big concerns with climate change is certainly public health. So Colorado's piece of this has a nexus in a number of ways, but the one I'm going to talk about is the Clean Power Plan. This was released just in August of last year. The EPA finalized the guidelines under the Clean Air Act. And EPA said that all the states must adopt a plan to implement EPA's rules. The targets for each of the states differed, but they were set by EPA. We can choose to implement our own plan, or EPA will impose one upon us. We chose to implement our own plan. And we are currently in the process of gathering public input on that plan right now. So if you haven't provided public input, please feel free to do that. There's information on CDPHE's website. There's also information on CWCB's climate change website on how you can participate in that process. But really what this looks at is roughly a 30% reduction in CO2 emissions across Colorado by 2030. And it's decreasing it in our largest sector, which is these energy generating units, or EGUs as they're referred to. So really a huge chunk of emission reduction within Colorado by 2030 just through the implementation of the Clean Power Plan. And Colorado's in a really good place to implement this because we have taken a number of measures on energy efficiency over the last 15 years. And we are really a national leader on where we are with clean energy, with renewable energy. So, incorporating the Clean Power Plan, the General Assembly stated that climate change presents serious, diverse, and ongoing issues for the state's people, economy, and environment. And as a result, passed a bill in 2013 that required us to develop a climate plan. It also created my position within the state and required some annual reporting on where we stand with our climate change efforts. So in September of last year, the governor's office released the Colorado Climate Plan. This is a multi-sectoral state-level document that looks at policies and recommendations. This plan provides a roadmap for state agencies to confront some of the worst effects of climate change and to identify priority actions. The plan outlines steps for state agencies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but also to adapt. Past climate change efforts at the state level have really focused on mitigation, which is critical and important, but we also recognize that we are already seeing warming in the state, and there are impacts that are going to occur that we cannot avoid. And so adaptation, especially within the realm of the water world, where there's less we can do on the mitigation side, is really critical. And so this plan charts that path forward for state agencies. And it is only the beginning of the discussion. We are holding public engagement sessions across the state for each of the sectors over the next year. We held the water sector public engagement session on Wednesday as part of the workshops for this event. We had great participation. It was really interesting. We asked folks to prioritize actions, and often there was a disconnect between what they felt were the priority actions that were most impactful, the actions that were most feasible, and the actions that were most cost-effective, which left us scratching our heads a little bit, and we pressed them on that. And what folks told us was that the most impactful items were, that oftentimes were also marked as the least feasible, did not mean that they were not still the most impactful and most prioritized items, but that the state should be focusing their attention on how to make those actions more feasible. And that some of the most cost-effective actions should not necessarily be considered something where we have to pour a lot of resources, but rather should be something that is considered best management practices that is integrated into the day-to-day operations of what everyone is already doing and widely incorporated. So I thought that was interesting. We know that to implement and achieve the goals that have been set forth, it is going to take broad partnerships. We know in Colorado we need to be collaborative. We know that we need to work across public-private barriers. We need to work with our NGO partners to get things done. We know that there is going to be a cost. Globally, they estimate $100 billion annually is necessary to implement the objectives set forth in Paris. And we are starting to see commitments on a really significant level from investors and financiers. This week, investors and financiers at a meeting in New York City vowed to invest significantly on the order of billions to trillions of dollars in renewable energy to help us achieve those goals. So this is something that is not just gaining momentum, it is starting to make smart business sense. And we're watching and looking at that in Colorado and figuring out, how do we build the Colorado that we want in the future? What do we want to make sure we protect and ensure? And we are committed to working together to ensure that that is the legacy we pass on to our children. So, if you are not able to attend one of the public engagement sessions, which I hope you are, because we still have a number more over the next year, we want to know, what are your biggest concerns about climate change? What information is most helpful to you? What programs are most helpful to you? And what do you want to see from the state? My inbox is always open, so please reach out and let me know. That's all I have.